Today's discussion is sponsored by Squarespace. Start your free trial today at squarespace.com/Masako to get 10% off your first purchase. Toriyama, you mad genius, you're heading straight into the lion's den, my friend. Hey guys, MasakoX here. Now BROLY, he's become a bit of a hot potato recently, hasn't he? Ever since he became the primary subject of the upcoming movie hitting our screens towards the end of the year, or at the beginning of next year, depending where you are, he's become a point where everyone in the fandom is a little bit conflicted. Everybody has been processing and re-evaluating what kind of character he could become now he's actually being integrated into the super lore. By the end of next winter, we could have a completely different character on our hands. 25 years of lore as BROLY being the tough big super dude who doesn't really say much apart from Kakarot could be history. Think about it. Everything that we knew and, I don't know, cherished would be just turned on its head in just a matter of a couple of hours. Despite this, Toriyama seems to be pretty chill with the ordeal that he's actually put himself in. Nobody else did, he did. And judging from all of the statements that he's made about the movie, he seems really relaxed about it and calm. In one of his typical open letters to the audience, Toriyama actually outlines the thought process as to how he ended up writing a new character design and type for BROLY. Everyone, are you familiar with BROLY? He's an incredibly strong Saiyan who originally only appeared in the old anime movies, and I apparently at least drew the designs for him, but I had practically no involvement with the anime at the time, so I had totally forgotten about the story content. So, about BROLY. I hear these days he's still very popular, not only in Japan, but also overseas. Based on that, my editor suggested we have BROLY appear in the next movie. Wait, what? Your editor? Who are you, and what have you done with the real Toriyama? Now you might be puzzled as to why I'm getting so worked up over the editor part of that sentence instead of having the editor say about BROLY being in the next movie. But it's a pretty major admission by Toriyama that he's changed his philosophy when it comes to editors from the thing that he's been talking about and actually practicing for decades, pretty much throughout his entire professional career. Oh dear, Toriyama and his editors, it's a never-ending saga that has spanned almost 40 years. When we usually hear the words Toriyama and editor in the same sentence, especially on these discussions, for the most part, you would also hear the word meddling, because meddling was the watchword when it came to editors talking to Toriyama. I mean, we don't know the ins and outs and the intricacies of what went on with those editors and Toriyama, but let's just say quite safely that Toriyama is a man who doesn't like going back on his work. I can actually relate to that somewhat. When I'm usually done with something, I like to move on to the next thing so I'm making constant progress. But when somebody comes in and says, oh no, I don't like that particular thing, could you go back and correct it? I don't take it rather well. Well, okay, you kind of have to because you're a professional, but deep down, it's much to my chagrin. In my mind, I think Toriyama is afflicted with the same quirk, but I think in his way of how to deal with it, he gets a little bit more creative. But that doesn't mean that he disrespected his editors. Oh no. If you had to find a way of describing it which was quite straightforward, it was like a love-hate relationship. The fact that he even cared about his editors was something to actually really hold on to. Throughout the majority of his professional career, the rise of his popularity, he had a total of 3 editors that saw him through the beginnings of Dr. Slump all the way through to the end of Dragonball Z, a time that spanned around about 15 or so years. His first editor was Kazuhiko Torishima, an editor and sometimes producer. In many interviews, Toriyama likes to talk about Torishima in the following manner. He's a guy who does not hide anything, but this also means he says whatever he feels like saying. I think we're suited for each other. People who hold things in are hard for me to figure out, so I'd not be able to work with someone like that. So already we can see that Toriyama's workflow clearly needs a supervisor for it to work at its fullest capacity. He needs to have people around him who say what they think, be very straightforward. Toriyama isn't really good at reading people, and that actually translates into his own work. A lot of his characters are very straightforward and basic. There's very little nuance when it comes to them. They pretty much just say what they think. I mean, what do you think Goku is? Goku pretty much just says what he thinks. He likes food and likes to fight strong guys. There you go. And even when you actually see characters that do exhibit some nuance, it's probably come from an outside influence, in this case, Torishima. And what's even more important is that Toriyama holds a lot of respect for Torishima because it was the latter that actually gave him the start of his career back in 1978. Toriyama actually entered the monthly Jump Award to try and get his work shown off in Shonen Jump, and Torishima saw it. It didn't necessarily win, but He liked the guy, so they worked together. It was an entry called Mysterious Rain Jack, which was really a blatant Star Wars parody. But to be fair, Star Wars had come out the year before, and Toriyama likes Western sci-fi movies. Toriyama also claims that he made the characters Dr. Mashirito and King Piccolo somewhat loosely tied to Torishima, at least in terms of personality and in the way sometimes they acted. Mashirito sometimes just went around saying, "Rejected! That's bad! I don't like it!" That was pretty much how Toriyama perceived Torishima at the time, being younger and much more naive, and much more likely to rail against the system. Mashirito and Torishima, those were basically just jumbled up versions of each other. It was a word pun, something that Toriyama truly embraces to this day. And if you think that Torishima wasn't aware of all of this, oh no, he was. In Daizenshuu 2, he actually talks about some of the ways that Toriyama and him worked together, and more specifically, how Goku was handled when he grew up to be an adult. The thing I felt was the biggest crisis for serialization was when he told me that Goku would grow up. Toriyama-sensei threatened that if Goku did not grow up, then he could not continue with serialization. It was terrible, breaching the subject like that. You can have the protagonist grow up, just don't scare me like that, I said. You can see that Torishima had to struggle with Toriyama in order to get him to do stuff. But one thing that you won't have to worry about struggling with is how to use Squarespace's easy-to-use platform to make your own website. From shops to blogs, there are dozens of templates to get you started making your own place on the internet. I've been working on my own personal website where I can archive and consolidate all my online work, and it's been an absolute breeze thanks to clear options and intuitive design. Not much knowledge of coding? Don't worry about it, it's all here. Right now, Squarespace is offering 10% off your first purchase with them, and you can get that by going to squarespace.com/Masako, or click my link in the description to sign up and start creating whatever you desire to display to the world. That's squarespace.com/MASAKO. Have fun! So while both men were butting heads, it's safe to say that deep down, despite all of this conflict, they actually really liked each other. However, Torishima didn't stick around for all that long. He actually moved on to other things at around the time of the King Piccolo saga of the Dragonball manga. Torishima went on to foster new talent, as well as become the editor-in-chief of Weekly Shonen Jump in the mid-90s. The man to take up Torishima's mantle was Yu Kondo, the second editor. And unfortunately, if you think that the same relationship that Torishima had with Toriyama was like with Kondo and Toriyama, this was probably the rockiest relationship Toriyama had with an editor. It was believed that Kondo was used in Dragon Ball Z not in the best of ways. It was rumoured that, despite all the talks of land sharks back in the 90s, some part of Frieza's personality was modelled off of Yu Kondo. But Kondo wasn't as perceptive as Torishima. For the longest time, Kondo thought that he actually inspired Future Trunks. Future Trunks and Frieza. No, there's quite a lot of difference there. Especially when you take into consideration that it's Future Trunks slicing Frieza in half. That's kind of a way that maybe Toriyama's venting, you know, being that specific. Because you remember, Future Trunks went to town on Frieza. But Kondo isn't all bad though. He came up with some really good ideas for Toriyama. In fact, it's Kondo that pretty much inspired Toriyama's persistence and determination to make sure that the Cell Saga was one of the best arcs in the entire franchise. Kondo-san said, "He looks ugly, of course he can transform, so I had no choice but to transform him into his second form." And then you were really awful, Kondo-san. "This time does he not look like a moron? Hurry up and make him into his perfect form," you said. While it probably wasn't the nicest experience for Toriyama himself, it's undeniable that the Cell Saga was one of the most polished and slick Dragon Ball Z arcs of the entire franchise, I mean even including Dragon Ball. It's held up to this day as a very interesting and well-developed arc, Cell being one of my favourite villains in particular. Having someone to rail against and rebel against actually gets Toriyama to think outside the box in a way which is kind of conventional, but at the same time produces inspirational results and interesting and intriguing characters. And I feel like Kondo probably used these 6 words to get under Toriyama's skin. I know you can do better. I know when I hear those 6 words it really grinds my gears, but I go, dang it, you're right. After Kondo stepped out, Fuyoto Takeda became the 3rd editor for Toriyama. And at least for him, it was a welcome change because Takeda was a lot more relaxed than Kondo. In fact, the only really big change or suggestion that he made to Toriyama was to give Mr. Satan a much bigger role. And I think I can speak for pretty much anyone else out there. That was probably one of the best decisions to come out of the Buu saga. Most of the time, he would defer to Toriyama's sense and judgment, because at this time, Toriyama garnered a lot of respect and people were very willing to want to please him, especially for the fact that he kept on talking about ending the manga, because he was really tired, he was weary after the Cell Saga. Kondo took a lot out of him, and everyone at Shueisha and Toei were very keen for Toriyama to continue with the serialization, because Dragon Ball was making bank. So Toriyama could do what he pleased, and that resulted in a very, very mixed bag of an arc. It's one thing's for sure, it's a very confusing one. I mean, yeah, it's Toriyama, it still had its moments, sure, but when you leave Toriyama unchecked, you produce some very, very questionable results. It ends up being kind of grotesque, overly cartoonish at some points, where it gets to you just don't really respect it at all, and then sometimes, without any kind of warning, it goes to some really dark places, something that really is kind of horrifying for a kids show. I mean, yeah, granted at the time it was shown on Wednesday primetime about 5:30, but still, kids are watching. All of this whiplash storytelling going from one mood to the other in the drop of a hat, it just leaves even the most steadfast of fans feeling utterly conflicted and thinking, I'm not sure whether I like this anymore. Now, let's bring things back to the present. The question is here, going back to that opening statement, the open letter. Who is the editor that has told Toriyama to introduce BROLY into the new movie? Many people actually suggest that it might be Torishima himself, because in Toriyama's eyes, or at least you can perceive it, he is the editor that Toriyama defers to the most, because they had the longest relationship as well as the most stable. Now, one thing we absolutely have to really register here is that Toriyama isn't being meddled by editors. He is actually deferring to the editors and asking them to meddle with his story, asking for feedback. That is a huge admission and a huge step down by Toriyama. And I think Toriyama has a genuine wish to want to change things. Toriyama is the major definition of an introvert. Introverts, I can speak as one, are people that really don't respond well to outside influence unless they want it. Once introverts let the bubble down and accept people coming in and talking to them, it's all harmonious, and that's what Toriyama's doing, allowing people to come in. When it comes to the Broly that we see in the trailer, we may not have heard any utterances save from screaming from Broly's mouth, but we can still see some subtle differences that bode for positive thinking. Broly isn't a husk anymore. He doesn't have that vacant stare. It's full of emotion, anger, rage, kind of confusion, as well as a sort of sadness. Also, keep in mind one of the trailer's taglines. What do you see beyond that strength? Maybe someone on the writing staff as well as Toriyama became aware of the fact that the problem with Broly is that besides his strength, there wasn't really much to talk about. And that all comes down to the original creator of Broly, Takao Koyama. He was one of the showrunners for the Dragon Ball Z movies, and Broly was his biggest creation. In the Koyama days, Broly was just a simple mountain for the characters to climb. Here, Toriyama can really integrate Broly into the story and create something different and actually truly embrace all of the different characters and interactions. This could create a character that is so much more meaningful. In fact, there's a character! Maybe now in his later years, Toriyama's come to the realization that, really, he does need an editor to actually push him further and further. He can pretty much pick what kind of editor he wants. Maybe someone who doesn't put him under a lot of stress like Kondo did. Someone like Torishima would be the perfect editor for Toriyama. We absolutely have to thank the editors of Dragon Ball all the way back to the beginning for creating a show that was fantastic, memorable, and now known worldwide. Toriyama may have been the writer and artist, but the editors are the ones that kept him going, kept him trying, innovating. Those three guys, Torishima, Kondo, and Takeda, thank you. So what do you guys think? Do you think Toriyama can fix Broly? Do you actually want him to fix Broly? Leave a comment below and let's get this discussion going. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Until the next one, be sure to like and subscribe. Catch you later!